The juice may be loose, but is he worth the squeeze? Let's talk about it. Hello and welcome to the Eye of the Storm podcast. This week we are talking about Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. But before we dive into that, let's talk about the best thing we watched in the last week. Howie, what's the best thing you saw?
So I didn't get to watch too much. I have guests staying around, so I've not had too much TV or movie time. But I did finally complete Three Body Problem. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about this a couple of months ago, where you liked the opening of it, but then everything after that completely fell apart for you. In that
the opening, I mean, like the first 10 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah. So I finally watched the last 3 episodes of it, and I will say I was left a little bit disappointed. I kind of understand what they were trying to go with, and sort of how they were trying to kind of set up the characters and position the characters towards the end of the series, but I just felt like disengaged. I felt like once the excitement of this whole mystery kind of wore off, the show kind of started to fall flat. The characters started to fall flat. There was then nothing really interesting about what was going on post that, and they had this one big idea to try and fight back, and it's kind of just all sad, really. I mean, I'm curious for season 2 to see if the kind of two worlds collide and come together, but for season 1 as a whole, I think it's pretty average, and this is meant to be the best thing that we've watched recently, but it's the only thing that I watched in the past week, so I just kind of wanted to mention that and talk about that for anyone that was on the fence about watching it.
It kind of wins by default.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, so I've heard good things about it in terms of the basic story and the books and stuff like that, and I liked the first 10 minutes, and then it kind of I just didn't like its style and tone. After that, does it get what I've seen screenshots, and it seems to get really trippy and out there.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the whole concept about it is that there's this alien race that's a few light years away, but they've been able to make contact with Earth, and they're slowly making their way here. And there's people that kind of worship them or communication with them, and then at a certain point they realize that humans can't be cohabited with, and actually humans are to be seen as bugs that need to be stopped or squished or whatever. And obviously the humans then have to fight back. So it's in terms of the interesting part of it was just how this alien species that were light years away are so much more advanced than what humans are, and they're able to kind of manipulate and impact stuff in the human world while still being that far away from them. Mm-hmm. And obviously there's the whole kind of cult following that the aliens have. Again, that's super interesting. And then you even have these scientists who by the end of it aren't really that interesting, but they then start to kind of interact with this world where you've got this one woman who's seeing, if she continues her research, she's seeing the countdown of her life, basically, and she'll eventually die if she continues with her research. And then you have these other scientists that have been given this helmet, which kind of transport them into this kind of game universe, which they have to try to solve this problem that's been sent to them. So all of that aspect of it is interesting.
Mm.
And then once you're familiar with it, and once you're comfortable with it, and then once they kind of start to move past it, it's okay, this is not as fun. Or when they start to trying to figure out how they fight back, it's okay, this is probably not as fun as the opening couple of episodes.
Yeah, it seems like the kind of thing I would be really into, but I've just not been able to. Maybe one day I'll get into it, but we'll see.
But yeah, what's the best thing you watched?
So I am continuing my exploration of movies about how hiking is evil. And this week I watched The Ritual, which is a 2017 supernatural folk horror movie. Mm-hmm. Which is the story is essentially there's a bunch of friends in the UK who are planning a holiday together. And as they kind of come out of the pub one evening, they one of them gets killed during a convenience store robbery. And kind of to honor his memory and to kind of achieve closure, the remaining 4 friends decide to go on the hiking trip to Sweden that they said they would go on. And kind of it was the dead friend's idea, and that was that he really wanted to go on that trip, and he could, now he can't, and so they decide to kind of complete that journey for him. And they kind of go hiking to Sweden, and they get off track, and they kind of get lost in the Swedish forest in the middle of nowhere. and they start encountering supernatural things. Like one of the first, like they kind of feel like they're being watched and followed, and they hear strange noises at night. And then there's like a gutted bear that's kind of just stuck to a tree. It gets weirder and weirder. It's both very atmospheric and very well shot, and it's kind of the stressor that brings out all the problems that these friends have had. They've bottled up for years, and it all comes pouring out in this moment of survival, right? Yeah. And it's just really, it's a very understated movie. It's a very small movie. It's really well acted, lots very atmospheric. It does have a few flaws, like you get no information at all for a long time, and then you get all the information suddenly in one scene, basically, which is its big flaw. But other than that, it's just a really good horror movie. It's just a couple of friends in a scary situation, and they try to get out, and it keeps getting worse. Is basically the deal. So it is really worth a watch.
No, sounds interesting for anyone that is into horror movies, which isn't me. But in terms of like how it differentiates itself from something like other similar movies, like I said, it's not sort of the newest story in the book. In terms of like group of friends go into like somewhere secluded, and then they like sort of have to deal with like all these hauntings and stuff like that. But like, how does a movie, like, what's the appeal for this movie compared to some of the other ones?
It's the acting, right? Like you really, like these characters like are nothing special, they're just regular guys. Like they really sell the reality of the situation, I thought. There's like none of these tired cliches about unlikable characters or people taking unnecessary risks. Like everything that happens in this movie happens for a reason, and it's usually a dumb reason, but it's a human reason. And it kind of strikes that balance really well, I thought. Yeah. And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Like characters doing stupid things in order to make a plot happen. Like that's how bad movies are made. But in this case, like there's a balance here where a movie can sell you on, yeah, these people are just tired and they've been hiking for a week and they just want to go home, and so they're willing to take risks and shortcuts that they otherwise wouldn't, right? So it sells you on its humanity is why it works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you mentioned the interesting point as well about how it kind of, it seems like towards the climax of it, these like group of friends are like starting to like unload sort of these like deep feelings in this and any other. Is that like well sort of kind of like not foreshadowed? Is like that set up sort of kind of like set up well for the movie, and is like the payoff like to that quite satisfying as well in the movie?
Yeah, none of that really comes as a surprise. Like it really like just without going into too many details, like they kind of blame each other for how the circumstances under which the friend got killed. And they've been saying, no, it wasn't your fault. But actually deep down, they think it was that person's fault. And that comes out when they're pushed to the limit. Right. And right. So it's stuff like that. So you do believe it. It's not contrived. It's not hokey. It's just very human.
Cool. No, interesting. So yeah, feel free to check that out. But Beetlejuice, main event time.
So Beetlejuice is a fantasy horror comedy film by Tim Burton, sequel to the 80s movie, 86, I think, which essentially follows the events of the first movie, where one of the characters from the original movie who was like a teenager in the original movie, has now grown up and has now a child of her own. And she's basically like a psychic who was able to see dead people in the first movie. And she's built that kind of into a career and has a TV show about it. And she's estranged from her daughter, who doesn't believe that her talent is real. And then she's about to get married to an awful guy who is kind of her producer and manager. And then Beetlejuice is being chased by his ex-wife, and there's like 57 different plots. And it all kind of comes together in the end, where Lydia kind of needs the help of Beetlejuice again in order to save her daughter from the afterlife, kind of thing. That's kind of guy. Like I'm stumbling, and there's a reason why I'm stumbling about this, is because there's so much going on in this movie, where it's really hard to summarize, because there's like, I saw somebody say somewhere that they had 4 ideas for this Beetlejuice movie, and so they made them. But it was all in one movie, that kind of thing. And I think it's really overstuffed, and it has way too much going on. And I think the gags are really good. Like whenever Beetlejuice shows up and whenever we go to the afterlife, I think it's really inventive, and I think it really shows that we're not in the 80s anymore, that in the 80s, Tim Burton kind of had to rein in his imagination, and now he doesn't anymore. And as a result, we get a bunch of really cool gags, a lot of great visuals, like a lot of great characters. But it's not in service of a story. And the story does not really, takes up too much, the nonsensical story takes up too much time, so that there's not enough for the gags. So the two, I think there are these two halves to it that really fight each other. And as a result, from about halfway through the movie, I was counting the minutes until I could leave because I was just not having any fun. And that's even though the ending is quite good. Like there's a payoff in there, but it's nothing I was really engaged in because it really rests on a story that is not that interesting, but it's also fragments of 4 other stories that are also not as interesting. So that's my basic impressions. What's your takeaway?
Pretty similar, except that I absolutely found this movie to be so entertaining. I was about to say I love this movie, but I can't say that I do because the story, like you said, there was just too much going on, and like each of the different stories had like good potential behind it, but like you mentioned, it's like 4 different ideas all stuffed in one. And like in the opening, you're kind of like introduced to sort of Beetlejuice's wife, and you think, okay, we're gonna go somewhere with the story, and then she kind of like disappears or becomes like inconsequential sort of to sort of the movie for large parts of it, and then you have like this whole like dynamic between the daughter, Jenna Ortega's character, and the mum. And of course, like she kind of like went through all the events of like the first movie, and like you said, like where her career is and this that, and the other. And then you got the daughter that doesn't believe her, and it's got the parallel between like her stepmom in the original movie, where like she was kind of a bit of a bet to her, like her mum. So you have like that idea that's in there as well, which is like quite interesting to go into to explore, but it's not done in sort of the best way possible. It's not handled with like enough care. Everything else aside from the story was great. Like Beetlejuice as a character was like fantastic. Anytime he's on screen, he's like very charismatic. He's like sort of just pure entertainment. Just like you mentioned, like all the different gags and laughs and stuff like that you get from this movie is like great whenever he's on screen. Even like exploring the afterlife in a little bit more depth as well, like kind of like seeing a little bit more of that, and just like again, like you said, like going a little bit more wacky and a little bit more colorful than what sort of the original movie was sort of fantastic to see in this movie as well. But it's just the story that holds it back, and it's a shame because I was like thoroughly entertained throughout it, and I was like enjoying my time while watching it, whilst also at the same time knowing that they've introduced too much and it's not really going anywhere and it's not really going to come together that well towards the end of the movie. I was still finding myself enjoying just like the feel of the movie. It was just like one of those feel-good movies that I'm a fan of. I'm a fan of like feel-good movies, and this was it, just with a weaker story than what you get in other ones.
Yeah, I think we agree that Beetlejuice is the highlight, right?
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
And I rewatched for the first time in like 20 years or something the first Beetlejuice the day before I saw this, and Beetlejuice has not missed a beat. Right? It's like he's the same character, and like the fact that he hasn't aged at all, or like his character has not changed at all, is kind of supported by this idea that he's not alive, right? So he's not lived a life in between, right? Like the other characters, and so they really sell this idea that he's the same guy and he's not moved on and he's not grown and he's not changed at all, and that's good. That's what he needs to be. And I enjoyed the movie every time he showed up. Yeah. And I think that's difficult, like a precarious balance, because I think Beetlejuice is one of those characters where if you have too much of him, he overstays his welcome really quickly. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he's on screen for that long, but he just keeps showing up, and every time he does, something cool happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's why for me he stuck out as this like as a highlight.
Mm-hmm. Because there's like certain parts in the movie where it kind of like slows down a little bit, or like it kind of like drags its feet, and so, and especially like towards the middle of it, and then whenever he's on screen, it's just like super frantic. They're like the way that he's speaking, the way he's like expressing stuff like that, it's like super frantic. So it just kind of like wakes you back up and like kind of like jolts you back to life. And sort of any time that he's on screen. Again, I was like similar to you. I'd only watched the first movie just before watching sort of this one, and I was like, how have I never seen Beetlejuice before? And like, how did I not know that Michael Keaton put on such a great performance? Obviously, I think they had to like tone down some of the stuff that he did in the first movies. Obviously, like modern day audiences, they can't kind of like make some of the sort of similar gags that they did in the first one, but they still did enough. They did enough to kind of like retain the spirit of what he was from the first movie into sort of the second one, which was sort of great. And this is just like a fantastic character, to be fair. Like I don't know how I've never seen any like clips or anything about it.
Yeah, he keeps coming up with these new wacky hijinks that somehow still kind of work. Like there were just a whole bunch of different scenes where I thought, oh, like it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened very often this year, where I looked at a movie and said, oh, I'm surprised by this, or this is cool, or this is into creative. And there were a couple of scenes in this where I really thought that, like when he kind of gives his exposition in Italian, and I don't know what kind of movie they were referencing.
Mhm.
Like it must be some kind of genre of Italian melodrama or something. I don't know, but it worked. Like it comes out of nowhere. It leaves immediately, but it's a wild ride while it happens.
Yeah, I was so confused during that scene. I was like, at what point? Like, I was like, I'm sure he's gonna switch back to English at some point. And he just never did.
No, just keep going.
Just kept going. But it was great.
And like it's completely it's completely random. It's completely non sequitur. But it kind of makes sense. Like of course Beetlejuice is doing this.
It's just like his character is just like
that's how he is. Yeah. And the fact that he's kind of turned into middle management as well. That he kind of runs this, I don't know even what they do, like he's part of the afterlife bureaucracy, and he's just the worst boss ever. He just makes, like, literally uses his team members as like human shields.
Yeah, the one where he turns like one of the guys, like he dresses him just like exactly like him as like a decoy.
Yeah.
It was like his like wife was just like the expression, like the guy.
And it works.
It works.
It's like the point where she mistakes him for Beetlejuice at one point, briefly, but it works.
Yeah, and just like I can't remember what his like little minions are called, but like just like the face of like you can just see like the dread. Obviously, like they can't say anything, and they've got like these like shrunken heads which like look ridiculous, but it's just like just pure entertainment. It's just like funny to watch.
Yeah, and also like every creature, like every character in the afterlife is just unique and has something going on. Right, there's nothing standard or repetitive about it. Danny DeVito as the undead janitor is great. Like he's just the right amount of creepy and excessive and vulgar. And for the like 2 minutes he's on screen, he's great, and he puts everything into those 2 minutes.
Willem Dafoe's character.
Yeah,
I know he's massively wasted in this, but he's like another like show stealer. Like anytime he's like on screen, and there's like even this like one gag where he's like kind of like giving a speech to some of the cops, and he's got, because obviously he's like a famous actor that's died, so he like still is in character, still playing that role. And they have that one scene where like they're holding up like the cue cards and like showing what he should be saying and stuff like anytime like Willem Dafoe was on screen, it was just like great. Like he was just having like a great time, like sort of performing as well in this movie. And yeah, he just had like so much charisma. He was like probably my second favorite after Beetlejuice in this movie, in terms of like just being fun, just being entertaining, wacky and stuff like that. He was just brilliant.
So we've talked about the stuff that works. How about the humans?
The humans firstly, Jenna Ortega's character, I can't remember her name in this. They had like a cool idea which they executed so badly, because at first when they kind of like introduced this like love interest and they were kind of pursuing that, I was like, of course they're gonna go down this road. Of course, like she's like in this random town, and of course she's gonna like fall in love with the boy and this and the other. And anytime like those like scenes came up in the movie, I was like so disengaged. It was just not what I wanted to see in that, and I kept like checking my phone anytime like that those scenes were on there. But then it has like a very interesting payoff, because it turns out that he's actually a ghost, and even like his backstory of like him when he tries to like play up as innocent, but actually he like murdered his sort of mother and father, like that was like super interesting as well. And that kind of like ties into like her story with her mother, in terms of like she didn't believe about like ghosts, she didn't think ghosts were real and this, that and the other. So there was this like interesting idea there, and I think they probably could have explored that a little bit more. They could have like maybe even spent more time on that, but they had like too much other stuff going on. But they could have spent more time on that, in terms of like making us believe that she's gone back to this small town, and in this small town she's like maybe fallen in love with this boy, and we like spend a little bit more time with it, so we like kind of like believe that he's there. And then there's like the big reveal that he's actually a ghost, and it probably would have like hit a little bit better. So there was a good idea, just not executed, completely well. Other human characters. Who's the stepmom with the red hair? I'm so bad with character names.
Delia.
I think I just like loved her because she was like the mom from Home Alone. Like anytime she was on screen, it's just like she just feels like my childhood, to be honest. Just for purely for Home Alone sake. So, but I actually do really like her character, even from the first movie. Just how like, again, just like how loud and obnoxious she is, and how like she just like like you think she's saying one thing, and then like she's just like I'm trying to find the word for it.
She's really eccentric and over the top, right?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much, and it works perfectly. It works
Yeah.
perfectly. It works perfectly. Like she, of the human characters, is my favorite one, like hands down.
And she always finds the way to do a sensible thing in the most obnoxious and pretentious way.
Yeah, pretty much. Even just like something as simple as telling who's the daughter's name, from the first movie, the mother.
Lydia.
Even like as simple as like telling Lydia that her father's passed away. She does it in like the most like random and like weird way in this movie, and it's just pure fun. Like she's just like she's hands down the best human character in this. She's just like great and eccentric.
Yeah, just to stick to Astrid for a second, because I think this is actually really cuts to the core of why this movie didn't really work for me, and that is that I think this basic idea that we're seeing kind of like the next generation of the Dietzes, like who would be like what kind of person they would produce.
Mm-hmm.
I think in principle is interesting. In principle, that the fact that she doesn't get along with her mother, just like Lydia didn't get along with Delia.
Mm-hmm.
Like that there are similarities there, but it's also different because they're different people and it's a different time, and all of that on paper is fine, but really nothing about her character I really believe. I don't believe that she is this jaded. I don't believe that she is this that she doesn't believe in ghosts for a second. Beetlejuice ends with Lydia essentially being adopted by ghosts and being raised by ghosts because her parents can't be bothered to actually raise her.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's how that ends, and that is like a happy end. That is like Lydia finally having found her people and their ghosts, which means they will never leave her, they will never change, and so on, right? And I don't believe for a second that Astrid did not grow up in a world where ghosts were an everyday factor, right? Like that she should have grown up. Like I understand we can't get Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin. They're not available, right? Like we can't get them, right? Not to mention that they shouldn't have aged 40 years and all of that, right? But okay, like for practical reasons we can't have them, right? But she should have grown up around them. Astrid should have grown up around these characters, right? And if not them, then other ghosts. There should be ghosts everywhere. Half her friends should be ghosts.
Yeah.
And especially since she can see them.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole story is predicated on Astrid not believing any of this, thinking her mother is a fraud, and holding it against her mother that she has not been talking to the dead father, right? Which doesn't really make sense, because if you think your psychic mother is a fraud, why are you blaming her for not talking to the father, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't quite make sense. Maybe it makes sense in the minds of a teenager. I don't know, but
it makes a little sense.
It does not make sense that Astrid sees the world in this way, and that is her personality, and that is that is the nature of why she's estranged from her mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the second step, which is the local boy, right? Where I actually think this whole idea that she falls in love with a ghost, and then he tricks her because she doesn't understand how the afterlife works. And it kind of continues this idea from the first one about contracts and the ghosts try to exploit the living and all of that, right? Mm-hmm. I think if that had, like that totally had potential, and if that had been the core of the movie, where she has to go to that rural town and she's bored and she doesn't want to be there and she, just wants to hang out with her friends, whatever, and then she finds this one guy in the entire town that's halfway decent, and then he tricks her into selling her soul. And then Lydia has to team up with Beetlejuice to get her back. And that's where they go on a crazy trip through the afterlife. That should have been the movie. Like, just make that the story. And it's much more simple, and it's much more focused. And the fact that it's not, that's maybe 20% of the movie is a problem.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And I think of all the ideas that are like kind of like meshed up in here, I think that's probably the best one that was in there, in terms of like her having like that doubt and then sort of seeing it. I mean, back to the point about her feeling like jaded about her father, it would make sense, because if you like see your mother like has a TV show and is like helping everyone with like their ghost problems, and then you kind of like feel some type of way about your dad, and then she has no answers for that at all, then you'd probably like feel a little bit like, okay, maybe I believe you, but I want to believe you, and I want to be able to communicate with my father, but you can't help me with that, but you can help everyone else. So like I can understand like the frustrations there, but
I get the resentment, but it doesn't fit together with I think you're a fraud and ghosts aren't real in the first place.
I feel it does a little bit, because like it's almost like you're like wishing for something to be true, Like you don't
Yeah.
feel it true, but you're like kind of like wishing for, you're like hoping for something to be true. And that one thing that's like kind of like held dear to you, that one thing of like, if this was true and I could communicate with my father and like my mother can help me with it, that would be like, you'd kind of feel like that. But I feel like her not being able to communicate with her father adds to the I don't believe that goes to real, and you're just like making things up and you're just like being a bit of a fraud. So that's kind of like just how I see it a little bit on that aspect of it. But yeah, no, I think you're right in terms of like that should have been the core part of the movie. It was the best storyline that was like sort of introduced in in this movie as well, and I actually quite liked the whole like teaming up of Lydia and sort of Beetlejuice in the movie. I thought like it was cool. Probably again not explored far enough because there was too many sort of distractions in there, and it would have been sort of kind of like cool to see sort of the dynamic between the two of them a little bit more throughout the movie. Like how I feel about this is that it feels like they had a few different big actors that were available to them, like Jenna Ortega became available for this movie. Willem Dafoe was available, and I can't remember the name. It's like Monica something was available as like Beetlejuice's wife. I can't remember what her full name is. It seemed like they had like a few different big actors, and then they had to just like satisfy each of them enough and give them enough to do in this movie. And that was to the detriment of sort of the overall sort of feel of the movie, because I feel like you could quite easily cut out Beetlejuice's wife and give something else a little bit more story time. You can quite easily cut out Willem Dafoe and give something else a little bit more kind of like breathing room in this. So yeah.
I hope that that's not what happened, because that would be a shame if that movie, if the movie kind of was destroyed by just too many people to please.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I just think generally Tim Burton, I think, is not a story guy. He's a vibes and crazy ideas guy.
Yeah.
And that's why this movie is the way it is. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that the story takes up like 2/3 of the movie. Like the actual thrill ride through the afterlife is relatively short.
Mm-hmm.
It takes up a bunch of stuff in the third act, and bits and pieces scattered throughout, but it's not the bulk of the movie, right? Mm-hmm. And like the first 2/3 are just so boring, where you have the family drama between Astrid and Lydia and her abusive husband-to-be, and the family thing and the funeral, and Delia trying to kind of make some quick money, and it's all so tedious and also unlikable. Like I actively didn't want to be around these characters. And part of this is that like kind of Lydia, I didn't believe Lydia at all. Did you buy that character?
I wasn't invested enough in her to really like care too much about her. I didn't completely like see the end of sort of the last movie, so I don't know how it ended up.
It's a happy end.
It's a happy end.
She gets rid of Beetlejuice, and she gets adopted by the Maitlands.
Yeah. What like kind of threw me off a little bit was like her style a little bit, and like how they tried to like maintain like that gothic emo style that she had like in the first movie. I was a bit like, okay, she's like kind of like grown up a little bit. Times have changed, like things have moved on. I don't think that she'd probably look exactly the same way that she did, but I guess they were trying to like give it a similar feel to sort of what it had in the first time round. In terms of like buying a character.
So here's the thing, like this is a trauma story, right?
Yeah.
Like she's traumatized, she's beaten down, she's desperate, she's settled for any jerk that will have her, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know why. I don't know why her life has been so rough.
Yeah.
She had a happy marriage for a while, and it's tragic that the husband died.
Mm-hmm.
But she's got a great daughter out of it. Mm-hmm. I don't understand. Like her parents are annoying, and that's kind of it. I don't understand why she's at such a low point at the start of the story, because the first movie didn't end with anything that suggested that was happening, and then we skip right for 35 years into the future, and she's like, it's not like the movie could have justified, right? They could have set up a status quo where we kind of get glimpses into what's happened and why she's ended up at this place, but I don't see why, and why that is her personality, and why that is, like, it doesn't seem to follow from anything we know about her. She seems to be a completely different character, and if she's the connective tissue to the first movie, pretty much, I don't know, and we spend a lot of time with her, then it kind of matters that she doesn't seem believable.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree with you. I think the reason I kind of like struggled with answering that was like I was trying to like figure out the justifications as to why her character was the way that she was in this particular movie, and it just never. It never really, like you said, it never really made sense. And obviously, like her having like this jerk husband and this and the other, and like her being like so oblivious to sort of know him and like his schemes and stuff like that. Considering how like they initially positioned her in the first movie, it didn't quite make sense. It almost felt like what the movie was trying to do was trying to like figure out how to make her not a bad mother or like a vulnerable or like a mother that sort of Astrid would sort of dislike or like have like negative feelings towards. And it felt like that probably came above like a logical step for her and like her journey as like as a character in this movie, because it just wanted to kind of create the conflict between Astrid and her mother is the only thing that I can even like think that makes sense for the way that she is in this movie, because like you said, there wasn't anything that would hint or suggest, and like she seemed like the most like sane one in the family in like the first movie. She seemed like the most sane one, the most like kind of like humble and like intelligent, this that, and the other in sort of like the first movie. So yeah, no, I can agree with that. It doesn't completely make sense as to why she is the way she is.
Yeah, I think you're right. Outside of her affectations, she was a pretty normal person, right?
Yeah.
Like not depressed, not like dysfunctional, not in any way. Like she didn't really have very much in the way of problems. Like her problems were that she didn't get along with her parents, and they were kind of just chasing money and status and didn't care about her. But that was kind of the core of her problems, and that got solved at the end, right? So yeah, but her turning into kind of like this fake psychic, or it's not clear to what extent it's real. I don't think we see much in the way of ghosts in her show. Like it's not like she's interviewing ghosts on her talk show or something. Like if anything, her ghost show should be like ghosts should be the most normal part about it. Right? They should just be people that get interviewed or talked about on the show, and everybody else thinks it's crazy, and to her they're just people. That's kind of what it should have been. I don't understand why she's identical to like these fake ghost hunting shows.
I was gonna say, yeah, it didn't make sense, the whole like haunted house thing and like the like doors in there like flapping open, this and the other. It didn't quite make sense in that part.
Yeah, like she should have just talked to the ghost and just said, yeah, I talked to the guy, here's what he wants.
Yeah.
Right? Something like it should be hyper normal. Right? And everybody else thinks it's amazing that she's talking to ghosts, and to her it's the most normal thing. Yeah, but I like it's like contrived conflict, right? They kind of have an idea of what they want the conflict to be, but they have no idea how to motivate it, right? They want there to be a rift between her and Astrid, but they don't really know how to get there. I mean, they want her to be beaten down, but they don't really know how to get there.
Yeah. I mean, this not the simple thing, but like what they could have done if they like introduced this whole like she's sort of invested in sort of speaking to ghosts and like kind of like having this like talk show and this and the other. It could have just been a case of like she's like too focused on ghosts. She's like kind of like become obsessed with ghosts and like speaking to ghosts and helping people with ghosts, that she's like neglected her child. And that's like that's like 101 like kind of like storytelling, where you have like this like super obsessive parent that like neglects their child, and then obviously like then the effects of that comes from that, and like the resentment and stuff like that, I feel like could have been explored a little bit more.
I actually had an idea for how to fix it. Make Astrid a law student. Very rational, very down to earth, very rules focused, very structured. And ghosts are normal for her, but she's just not the kind of the creative type. She's not as intuitive as her mother, and that is where the conflict comes from. That they both can see ghosts and they both know ghosts are real and normal, but they don't agree on anything else. Right? That they don't have the same interests, they don't have the same temperament, they can't be in the same room with each other, and then they have to in order to solve whatever problem happens in the movie. And that kind of ties back into this. Like there's like one scene at the very end where Astrid points out a flaw in the marriage contract, right? Where Beetlejuice says something like, well, you still signed this marriage contract, we're still married. And she points out some technicality, and then the contract literally goes up in flames.
Convenient.
And I thought that is cool. Like we've had this whole idea about contracts and rules and structures and this weird, wacky, chaotic afterlife where Astrid at one point says, why is the afterlife so random? But it's actually quite structured, right? Like it's very bureaucratic, there's contracts and whatever. And we've not had a lawyer really in this story, right? Like what if a lawyer starts interacting with these ghosts? And a lawyer who knows the ghosts are real and thinks they're the most normal thing in the world. So I think that's my fix. That's how you fix Astrid. And also, I could just have focus on she gets tricked into signing away her life, and then Lydia has to team up with Beetlejuice to get her back. like that's the story. And then we have an hour of stuff happening in the afterlife, and then in the end they come together in a way that's satisfying from a character standpoint. And that's what it should have been, and that is then the setup for all the jokes and the weird episodes, right?
Yeah, and then you can keep the father in there, because that then like helps like tie a few sort of different like plots points together, in terms of like her father being in this like afterlife, and then like he having a reason to kind of like appear in this, because it wasn't completely clear as to like why. I mean, they explained it that like he was watching from a distance but didn't want to interfere or whatever. Maybe because obviously, you know, Lydia is able to see ghosts, and maybe he just I don't know why he'd want to stay away, why he wouldn't want to have like the interactions like with them essentially. But
yeah, I didn't really understand why the father is such a big deal, in the sense of it's not really clear why ghosts appear. Or why Lydia should be able to talk to them on demand, right? She can just see them if they are around.
Yeah.
In the first movie, the Maitlands had not been able to move on because of their attachment to the house, right? And because they couldn't accept that they were dead.
Yeah.
And but once a ghost has moved on, it's a one-way street, right? Like, it's not like there are ghosts randomly appearing in the story over and over, and Lydia kind of just sees all of them. It's like, if a ghost is sticking around, if a soul is sticking around as a ghost, then people like Lydia can see them.
Yeah. Speaking of other things that didn't make sense as well, was like towards the end of the movie where Beetlejuice kind of like blows a hole and brings Lydia into the afterlife, into like the afterworld.
Yeah.
And then his little minions kind of like run out and everyone can see them. And I was a bit like, it doesn't quite make sense, like why that is the case. Essentially, like, why can everyone like all of a sudden see like these ghosts in this movie? It's just like, yeah, wasn't explained well.
I think everybody could see Beetlejuice, right? Or was he invisible?
Well, you see, this is where it gets a little bit weird, because like, why would they be able to see Beetlejuice if they can't see any other ghosts? Why would they be able to see like? And how is he able to like then like interact with the real world in that type of way, whereas like other ghosts aren't able to at all? In terms of like physically present, where like he can be seen by by people. Yeah,
the rules aren't clear.
Yeah,
right, and because of that, the stakes are maybe not as believable.
Yeah, and it means like you just kind of like question everything, and nothing really like makes sense in terms of like.
Yeah, but it's supposed to be wacky and random, right?
Yeah, of course.
So I'm okay. Let's say it's an inconsequential joke, like the fact that these guys with the shrunken heads are just running around town, just causing chaos.
Yeah,
it's fine. I think like it doesn't impact the story in any real way, other than there's crazy stuff happening.
Yeah,
I think what's more important is kind of the rules of who owns souls and contracts and stuff like that, because that's where the character moments come in, right? That's where characters have to make decisions, and that's where characters kind of have stakes and there's ramifications to their actions. I think that part really has to make sense, and I think it does. Like, there was nothing that stood out to me where I said, okay, like this is just a contrivance, or this is just happening because the script says so. Like, this whole thing about signing away your life, that's consistent at least. And it also has this theme of of weddings, right? Like, weddings being mistakes. There's at least three, right? Like Lydia and Beetlejuice are not meant to be together, right? Or it's not a good idea. It's exploitative towards Lydia, right? And then you've got Lydia's marriage to Rory, right? Which is also a terrible idea. And she's kind of doing it out of obligation, or because she can't, like, she's settling, and there's no one better around, so she might as well, and everybody else around her can see it's a mistake, and it'll be terrible for her, but she's the only one who can't. And then there's like Astrid isn't getting married, but it's a similar thing, right? They make a deal or commitment of some kind that turns out to be a bad idea for her. So there's like at least 3 bad marriages going on. So that seems like a theme to me, but I couldn't tell you what it means.
Yeah, I don't know what the you like, as you were mentioning it, I was trying to think what was the like wider like sort of picture, what was the bigger picture of all of that, and like I wouldn't be able to give you that.
It would be really nice if it meant something, right? Like if there were parallels to this, and if that's maybe what brought Lydia and Astrid together, because now they're going through a similar situation where they kind of are being manipulated by ghosts, and it takes the form of a marriage, or like something similar. And maybe Lydia sees a younger version of herself in Astrid, and that's the first time she's felt some kind of connection to her. because they're just that different as people, whatever, right?
Yeah.
You can imagine how this might be something.
Yeah, no, even if they made Lydia and Rory's relationship a little bit less like obvious that he was like completely like scamming and scheming her, and then like kind of like Astrid falls for something similar, and then she then understands her mother's perspective a little bit more, because she sees the trap, like how you can kind of like be blinded by like love and blinded by the situation you're in. Like would have been a little bit more interesting, but I think they made Rory's character a little bit too on the nose and too wild and jokey, to be fair. Even though I didn't mind him actually, and I know a few people like kind of like had negative comments about him. I didn't quite mind him in this movie, but he was Rory. I didn't mind Rory in this, but he was just like a bit too on the nose that he's like slimy and the bad guy in this. They did try to do something similar to the first movie, which I think the first movie did extremely better, and that was the dance number, or like the sing and song dance number. I felt like the scene around the dinner table was great. And this actually might just be because I knew the song in the first movie and I didn't actually know what the song was in the second movie. So it didn't probably like hit as well as it would have for someone else that knew what the song was. But like when it happened in the first movie, I was like, this is great. Like I was singing along, like the music was great. Like the dance and all that stuff. It was like the right amount of like silly in that. And then this one, I recognized what they were doing and I was a bit like, and I actually think it's probably 90% because I didn't know what the song was, so I couldn't like really engage with it as I did the first one. But I don't know, what was your thoughts on that? And actually, just like one more point is that one thing that this movie did well, which others sort of like which other sort of kind of like legacy movies that have been remade have failed to do, is that it kind of like told a different story. It didn't like rely on like the first movie story and just kind of like rehash that and just like tell that all over again. They kind of like try to expand on it, try to build on it, and try to tell different stories. Obviously, it didn't sort of kind of like stick the landing on it, but that was like another positive, that it wasn't just the first movie made all over again for a modern audience, just to kind of be a bit of a cash grab.
Yeah. So the dance number in this movie, honestly, I don't even remember it. So it must not have made much of an impression.
Yeah,
I think the first one is like in the first movie, the one at the dinner, where I think Beetlejuice takes control of them, right, and makes them do a silly dance, right? Like that's a great scene. That's fun and that's imaginative, and it's kind of where kind of the reality of the ghosts kind of comes through, right? It becomes really apparent for the first time, I think. Yeah. What was the one in this one?
It was at the wedding. It was at the wedding when they're trying to like, when Beetlejuice kind of like appears and he like sucks all the influence into the phone. He kind of speaks in Italian, and then it kind of goes into the dance number.
Yeah. Honestly, it made no sense.
Remember that? Okay.
I do think the church sequence was great.
Yeah.
Just as a set piece. Problem is, it was a payoff to something that wasn't set up properly, or at least it hadn't gotten me on board during the setup. But it feels like kind of the core of the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Where like the big showdown and Beetlejuice does cool stuff, where Beetlejuice just tells the cops to freeze and they do. It's a cool gag. Yeah, I don't know. Like I could recognize that this was kind of the highlight of the movie, but at that point I was already checked out and didn't care about these characters. And it's like I think a scene like that requires that you care about the characters and their journeys. Mm-hmm. And if the journey of those characters is not compelling, then the payoff also isn't compelling, even if some of the visuals look cool.
Yeah, no, you're right, and that could possibly be why I didn't connect. That like might be another reason why I didn't connect with it. Yeah. But in terms of like this trying to be something more than just the first movie and something different, like what was your kind of like thoughts on that, and like did you kind of appreciate that? Because obviously we've seen so many movies where it's just been too much of the same.
Yeah, so generally I'm really tired of those legacy sequels. Like 30 years later, 40 years later, we're bringing back we're dusting off all the old actors and we're bringing them back, and everything is a little bit tired and a little bit deflated. Mm-hmm. And I thought this had an energy. I thought this had creativity. I would like to say it builds on the mythos and was like it expands the afterlife, right? Like we see more of the afterlife. It was like the afterlife being a bureaucracy and like being a waiting room is a cool gag, but it was just a very short gag, right? And here we see more of it. We go behind the scenes a little bit. We go one step further, and I think if that had been the focus of the movie, I think it would have had much more value. And that's kind of the bottom line, where we spend so much time on stories that don't make sense or are not interesting enough that we don't have time for actually exploring the stuff that's cool. And that what's really cool is the wacky ghost hijinks.
Mhm.
And there's not enough of those. And I don't know if you can fill an entire movie with them, but
Okay.
that's kind of the part that works and that's fun.
Mhm. And that's where they probably need to be a little bit better in terms of like balancing the story and like, because how long was this movie? Hour 45? Could have probably
Something
cut
like
it down.
that.
Yeah, I think they could have probably cut out like an extra 50 or 20 minutes out of this and like been a little bit more streamlined and focused, and given us a little bit more.
I think that thing has to be redone completely.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about make it shorter or take out the subplot. No, the entire thing has to be redone. A lot of individual pieces are good, like the actors are good, the effects are good, the gags are good. But it's like the story that underpins everything. And I think one of the things that really makes it not work is that the first one was very simple, like very simple linear story.
Mhm.
And then we had the jokes kind of as decoration, right?
Mhm.
Like you were along for the ride of the Maitlands and of Lydia and all of these things. It's like for a cake you need frosting and you need cake in the right proportions. And here we have kind of too much of both somehow.
Mhm.
You wouldn't think that's possible. You would think that it would just make a big cake, but it's like the two parts kind of ruin each other, in my opinion, and then the wrong places and stuff like that. I think you have to really retool the story from the ground up, and it has to be something simple and to the point that then enables the jokes, that gives Lydia a reason to have to deal with Beetlejuice again, and for Beetlejuice to have some kind of leverage so that he can kind of go back into the realm of the living and has a reason for being there, and Lydia can't just get rid of him immediately, and all of these things, right? To give Astrid something interesting to do, which also she doesn't really like. It's all just broken from the start, I think, on a story level. Like I said before, I think the jokes are great, and if there were more of them, and if that was the center, it would be great. But you really needed a simple story to pin everything together and kind of motivate it and give a satisfying payoff at the end, where Astrid and Lydia kind of get to places that are emotionally satisfying. And because the story is convoluted and bloated and overly complex, we never get to that point. I don't think.
Yeah. I think we probably talked a lot about the story of this.
Yeah.
I know we've had a conversation already about in separate sort of the discussion about practical and CGI. How well do you think it was handled in this movie? Because like for me, I loved some of the callbacks, like things like the sandworm and how they kind of like paid homage and like made it look as ridiculous and as silly as it did in sort of like the original movie, and like all of sort of like the different effects in the afterlife and like sort of like all the people that were in there and like kind of like showing how they died and stuff like that. I thought like all of that was like really well done in this movie, and it was like equally good in sort of the first movie in terms of like sort of like kind of the practical effects. Some of it was like a bit janky, like in the first movie where like they're in like the desert place and it looks completely fake and it looks completely ridiculous
on purpose.
Yeah. And then in this movie they kind of like revisit it, and it has that same type of feeling towards like in this movie. But again, like I think you said, it's probably done on purpose and it actually like just gives a good feeling. But what was your kind of thoughts on sort of how they used practical effects, CGI, and stuff in this?
Yeah, so I think the effects look great. All the visuals are great. The creature designs, the character designs. It all feels kind of dreamlike, but also really there. And it really continues the aesthetic of the original movie. So on that front, I think it all works. And I didn't really pay too much attention to what was practical and what was CG. I think a lot of it seemed practical. And it felt like it was really there. It wasn't just a green screen, right? So on that front, I don't really have many complaints. It's more like the gags would be stronger if they meant something. But by themselves, the gags were generally great. It goes hand in hand with the design of everything and keeping the style of the original, but just at a higher quality level, right? Like it's clearly looks better than in 1986 or whenever it was, or 88. But it's still the same style, right? It feels like a continuation of what came before, and it's just bigger and more complex. And we go one step further. And I think if you're really into the first movie, I think that's the stuff to like here. And honestly, my audience had like when I saw it, had laughed at every joke, and he was completely on board with everything, and everybody seemed to have a good time except me. Like, because my focus is so strongly on the story, right? And I want there to be like kind of some kind of character thing at the center that underpins everything, and that's just missing here. But all the jokes landed with the audience, right? And they were creeped out by the Beetlejuice baby, and they laughed at all the right gags and everything, right? So it clearly works, right? And I think it understands its appeal, and I think it really plays to its strengths in those sequences. Problem is, there's also another half to the movie that's not quite as good, but like when it works, it really works, and it feels like a continuation of what came before, and it feels like an expansion of what came before. And so on that level, I think it's a really strong sequel in that sense.
I am very jealous of you, because in my cinema, it was me and like 4 other people. So there was like literally no laughs. And apart from like me like chuckling in my seat a couple of times, there was literally nothing, like not a pin drop. You could hear a pin drop in my cinema because like there wasn't that many people in there. So
and they were not into it.
It didn't seem like it. Like I don't think I heard any laughs at all throughout the movie. Again, like I was just like kind of like chuckling to myself in my seat, but I didn't really hear any like interactions elsewhere. That's probably the emptiest cinema that I've been in this year for a movie. So I'm like surprised when like it's making so much money, because like in my cinema it was completely empty.
Yeah, that sounds like an anomaly. So my cinema has extra showings, and they're all pretty well sold out. Not entirely, but
yeah,
they have a pretty decent showing. And my crowd was there for it. That's the reason why this one is like on track to be one of the big hits of the year.
Yeah, I think third biggest opening of the year for my
Like that, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. No, I to be fair, I did go at 9:45 p.m. on the Sunday, so
yeah, that might be part of it.
Part of the reason, yeah. So, what would make you come back for Beetlejuice? Because that has to be the name for the third one.
It has to be. Yeah. Or call it Beetlejuice 2.
Okay.
Just because. I don't know. I mean, like what I want out of this is just Lydia and or Astrid to go on a cool journey and to get up to weird ghost hijinks. Yeah. And for Beetlejuice to be there and be his obnoxious and appropriate self. Like, that's kind of like, I don't really have high standards. I just want them to do something interesting. And I think if I saw that Tim Burton was not in charge of story, I don't know if he actually wrote this. Actually, no, he didn't write this. So 3 other guys wrote this. So I can't even blame Burton for it. Like Burton seems like a style over substance kind of person to me. So I take it back. Like, this is not his fault. If I heard that the story was better, then I would probably be there. Or if the story is kind of just an excuse for jokes, then I'm also there. It's this in-between thing that really makes the movie obnoxious. And I don't know that we need a third movie. Like, one of the problems with, like, it's not just a technicality that I'm harping on about the story and the character arcs, right? Because I don't think Astrid is on a journey that I think needs another chapter. Like, I don't think the movie puts her into an interesting situation. Like, they do this montage where she finds this Hungarian tour guide or whatever that was, and kind of lives happily ever after. Like, you can tell another story, but there's nothing really there where I say, okay, this is unfinished, or this is, like, I want to see where that goes next. Like, she's not interesting enough for that to kind of continue the legacy or continue the story. And everybody else is getting a bit on in age, right? Michael Keaton can't play, like, he won't play Beetlejuice at 80, right? No. He's like early 70s now. And I think he's great for that, but like, there's like, I don't know if Beetlejuice without Beetlejuice or with a different actor could work.
I don't know.
Unless like Beetlejuice's son starts going after Astrid or something. I don't know. Like, maybe you can do something with that, but then you have to get exactly the right actor to kind of continue like be just as entertaining.
Yeah. It would need to hit. It would need to hit, because if you take out the essence of what the first 2 movies were, or if you take out the essence of what the original movie was, I don't think it works.
And I think it's possible. It's just, it's not been set up yet. Yeah. And I think these 2 movies together are pretty much a complete story. It seems to have its closure, right? It seems to have a conclusion.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need another one.
I think the only reason I would go for another one is because I'm invested in the world in terms of like, it's just cool, it's just wacky, and it's just like one of those like kind of like feel good movies, and I would love for them to have another attempt to just make the story better, because like I said, like this is a cool movie, but it's not one that I would revisit because, like you said, the story is a little bit of a mess. It's like kind of like all
Yeah.
over the place. So it's not one that I'd revisit. So I would hope that they would have a third attempt, try to make it a lot better story wise, still have the same feeling. Don't wait as long because obviously the actors are getting on a little bit. And if they could nail that and give me a Beetlejuice movie that I could revisit more than once and like actually like show my kids eventually and this that, and the other, I would love that. Which is the only reason I'd go for a third one.
And I think the first movie is that. I think the first movie is great. It has a complete story. It's aged well, I think. Like it's not like the effects hold up, the characters hold up. You mentioned earlier like there's like creepy stuff in there, but it's all Beetlejuice and he's supposed to be creepy. Like it was supposed to be creepy in 1986. So I don't think that's aged badly because like things tend to age badly when they were meant to be normal at the time and now they aren't. Right? That's when a movie ages badly, and that's not the case for Beetlejuice, I don't think.
No.
So I think the first movie actually just stands on its own. And you might be pleased to hear that there's a Beetlejuice animated series from the 90s.
I heard that actually. I did hear about that actually. Yeah, I haven't checked that out, but I do know it's there.
I don't know how good it is. I think I saw a bunch of episodes like in the late 90s or something, and I remember enjoying them. But I don't know how well it holds up.
Is it voiced by Michael Keaton, the Beetlejuice in the series?
I don't know. I probably not.
Probably, I was gonna say probably not. I might give it a watch just to see if. Like you mentioned, if you could have like someone else step in and like if it gave the same feeling as like the original Beetlejuice, I might check it out for that reason.
Yeah, but like I said, I think the first movie is just a complete thing, and I think that one can be recommended, and this one I don't know. Like I'm not upset I saw it, but I also didn't enjoy myself because there was just too much time spent on non-fun things, and it's just over like pretty much. Outside of the effects, it's just a worse movie in every way, right? Like the first one is actually really solid on story and character, and this one isn't for some reason. And for something to like, if that's just how Beetlejuice movies are, like the ghosts doing weird stuff, then that's fine. But it wasn't always like this, right? The first movie shows us that there is a better way of doing this.
Yeah, it just needs to be more focused, and this is. It's just a constant critique of like modern movies. It's like it's just too focused, no, too unfocused, too blurred in certain places, and like it's just like either non-existent story-wise or overcomplicated and not simplified enough.
Yeah, I think being overcomplicated is really the problem. Like there's too much stuff going on. There's too many cooks. There's not enough. So in my mind, I kept comparing it to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, which I hated when we reviewed it. And I think it's a similar thing where it kind of gets the vibe right for the most part. But there's too much stuff going on and none of it is really compelling enough. And I think this is better than that because the gags actually work, whereas the ghost busting stuff in Ghostbusters didn't work, I didn't think. So it is better in that way. But it has a similar problem of not being focused, of having like 27 halfway decent ideas that most of them could be their own movie, but they never get any chance to develop or go anywhere interesting because there's no time. But then we spend extreme amounts of time on just boring family stuff that is just eats up all the oxygen. And so it's similar in that way. And I think a lot of modern movies are like this, where for whatever reason they don't like focus. They don't like it when there's like a straight arrow story. Like original Beetlejuice is like this. Original Ghostbusters is mostly like this. When we talked about Terminator, we talked about how that's a near perfect script because it's just one thing, and it does that really well. And like pretty much all my favorite movies are like this. I think they just work better. Yeah,
because I do feel like they just like the side characters are side characters for a reason, and they don't need all the attention. They don't need all the screen time that they get in certain movies. And if you are going to kind of service an idea where there's like loads of different stories happening, there has to be one overarching story where each of the different stories feeds into the bigger story and like kind of like has an impact and plays like a significant role, and you can kind of see how each is influencing one another essentially. And I don't feel like any of it does it. I feel like in this movie we've got like 4 complete different stories that are happening, and like Beetlejuice's wife has nothing to do with Astrid seeing ghosts, which has nothing to do with like Astrid's relationship with her mother and this and the other. So it's just like I was trying to find like an example of like where it does it well. I can't think of it off the top of my head.
Where this movie does it well?
No, where like a movie like has multiple different like plot points, but it, like kind of like all feeds into sort of the overarching narrative and does it well. I was trying to think of one off the top of my head, but it's just
Yeah, not off the top of my head, no, but like it can be absolutely be done. It kind of I think when these things have a point and kind of move towards a common goal in some way, whether it's thematic or something else, or just moving all the characters towards one conclusion or something like that, I think then it's fine. But here, like Beetlejuice's wife thing doesn't even have thematic resonance. Like it is another example of a bad marriage, right? Like a marriage that was a mistake.
Yeah.
But why did we need a fourth one? And why couldn't she have done something interesting? Like, why couldn't she have given some kind of interesting insight into who Beetlejuice is? Maybe she knows a different side of him than everybody else. Maybe she brings out his human side because they were married when they were alive. Like something. Give me something.
Yeah. Even like the whole like her like sucking like the soul out of like people and this that, and the other, and that giving like a little bit more like life essence and this that, and the other.
Also no point. Like was she charging up for something?
I don't know, because like when the first introduced, I was like very menacing and like very like threatening, and like that's a very real threat for like anyone that's in the sort of in the afterlife, similar to like the exorcism in sort of the first movie, where like if you exorcise, you kind of like go to sort of whatever place it was in that first movie. But yeah, it just didn't really matter. It was like very inconsequential at the end of the day.
But then we spent so much time on it, and yeah, so if I don't know. Like, I can't even salvage it. Like, I can't even imagine a version of this where, okay, if this had been different, then it would have been interesting or something. But what if, like, she had teamed up with Lydia and they kind of hate Beetlejuice for different reasons or something? Or maybe Lydia thinks they are on the same team, but they aren't. And, you know, she's just using Lydia to get to Beetlejuice or something. But not even that happened, right?
No. But even like you mentioned about like how she could have like brought a different side out of Beetlejuice, but then that like her bringing the different side out of Beetlejuice could have then impacted like how he like then deals with like Lydia in terms of like how he's like teaming up with her to like save whatever. Like there just could have been like something there which connected it a little better than what it did, to be honest. But yeah. Do we have any other thoughts before we go on to last thoughts? Because I know we've like kind of taken the story of this, we've dragged it through the mud a little bit, and given it a few smacks. So, any last thoughts?
So, bottom line for me is I like a bunch of the pieces here. I don't like any of the characters. I don't think they add very much. And on that front, it's all worse than in the original. I don't want to see it again. Like the first one, I'll see again eventually. This one, I don't see any reason. I've seen the gags now, and you know, I was entertained by them. But that's not something I want. Like, that's not enough to support a movie for me. And so, for that reason, it's a 5 out of 10 for me.
Is this your first normal rating out of 10?
By coincidence.
Okay.
It just worked out that way.
Fair enough. Fair. We'll cherish that, because I'm sure we can get something crazy next week as well. But yeah, I think I share the same sentiment as you. Probably not one that I'd watch again. Not one that I was mad at that I watched. You know, definitely got enough entertainment out of this one compared to a lot of the stuff that we've watched this year so far. And yeah, it just always goes back to story, and it always goes back to having potential that's unrealized, which is frustrating. And I think that's kind of been the story of the year so far in terms of movies. But yeah, I'd be down for a third one. If they did do a third one, I'd be down for it. Hopefully with a little bit more of a focused story, which I know we're definitely not going to get. But I'm here to see Beetlejuice be Beetlejuice one more time. So with that said, I would give it a 6 out of 10. It's average. I was gonna say above average, but it's an average score. 6 out of 10 for me. I think that kind of sums it up. Not too good, not too bad. Yeah, I think that's everything from us today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Of course, let us know your thoughts down below. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like about the movie. Let us know if we missed anything, any other themes within the story as well. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ciao.
Bye-bye.